honourable mentions for the year 2021. As I do every single year, I always run down some albums and songs that I think are absolutely worthy of being mentioned for the best music of the year, but they just don't quite make the list. So as always, I run down the albums that I think are worthy of mentioning and highlighting and recommending to you guys in case you haven't already heard them. And then at the end I have like a little compilation section of all the songs that don't quite make the cut. It's always really difficult to trim things down to like a top 50 or whatever. So, you know, having these extra accolades, these extra mentions feels worthy, and they're all really good as well. You know how this goes, may as well get straight into it. I want to start with Bleachers. I think Bleachers dropped the best album that they have put out to date this year. I think tracks like Don't Go Dark are some of the best songs we've ever heard from Bleachers, and some of the best songs Jack Antonoff has ever been a part of as well. And that's a pretty bold claim to make, considering he has been part of so many big projects, huge mainstream artists over the years. We've seen him with Lana Del Rey, we've seen him with Lorde, we've seen him with Taylor Swift for many years at this point as well. But I still think this Bleachers album goes head to head with any of the albums he's been a part of over the years, and it's kind of gone a bit underrated. I still think it was bookended by two tracks that were definitely the weakest on the album, but everything in between was really earnest, was really soulful, and felt like a really nice homage to, you know, the best days of Springsteen, without sounding like it was copying that era too much. Pink Siifu next with one of the better rap albums of the year. I think creative rap album too. I mean, there were so many different genres being blended together. There was a bit of a southern rap twang across the album as well, but a lot of it felt like he was delving into more of the trap type stuff that we've been hearing dominate hip-hop for the past like 6, 7, 8 years at this point. He's not going too far into being, you know, like a I guess like a Waka Flocka Flame or anything like that, but I still thought this direction was actually really interesting to see, and it just felt like he was having a lot of fun as well. His flows were animated, his delivery was always kooky and strange, but he was keeping his weird side while also just making the songs really accessible and really enjoyable. Nick Cave at this point in his career is just penning the most beautiful songs he's probably ever made, and he has been doing that since Skeleton Tree, and it peaked for me, the late stage of his career peaked for me personally with Ghosteen. Some of the best writing he has ever penned, I believe, in my opinion. Some of the most beautiful and harrowing songs ever in his entire discography as well. And here again, we just have another album that extends what he's been doing. I mean, the thing with this album to me felt like it wasn't quite as good as Ghosteen, so it was hard not to really compare. And, you know, obviously a lot of the tracks still fall into a similar vein, like Albuquerque, for example, but it still offered some really fantastic Nick Cave songs with Warren Ellis pairing up with him as well. And that really stark moment on White Elephant is still one of the boldest and disturbing moments of Nick Cave's past like 20 odd years. This reminded me of like his early days where he was really bold and brash, but that hasn't really popped up in a while, but on White Elephant it did. And I thought that was quite an interesting moment on the album too. So yeah, it's just really good Nick Cave music once again. I enjoyed the Really From album this year as well. Just some really classic math rock tinged emo type stuff that you've heard and has been done to death for years. But this is actually one of the better examples of that I've heard in quite some time, to be fair. And there were some really nice instrumental passages as well that felt like they were going in a bit more of a different direction to your typical emo bands. This is a good album. Agnes next with one of the most overlooked pop albums of the year. I actually think this was a really enjoyable listen. There were some really cringy and corny moments in the lyrics occasionally, in my opinion. I thought some tracks were really written in a bit of a kind of way, and the interludes felt really pointless at times as well. But generally, the booming electro pop direction that she takes is really, really enjoyable. I mean, it just once again shows that the Swedish folk are just so good at the pop music, and this album really shows that. 24 Hours, what a banger that is. A really good pop album here. I think anyone that is looking for some good straight up electro pop music for the year 2021, you can't go wrong with this. Another pop album that is worth your time, incredibly underrated and overlooked actually, Cabiria, who is a Spanish pop singer who goes in a more of a delicate synth pop direction as opposed to what we saw Agnes do, which was just booming and in your face. But yeah, this is really lovely stuff. I mean, I know she is Spanish, but at times it reminds me of some really lovely French pop music that you would have heard in like the 60s, the 70s, that kind of era. And it's just some really lovely pop music, to be honest. You can't really go wrong with it. She has a really gorgeous voice as well. Lucki next with one of his best mixtape / albums to date. Really like the direction he's going here with the production. Sounds like a slightly different change of pace for him. He's got flows for days. He's got bags of flows, and it just makes him such an entertaining rapper to listen to. And like I say, the production is so colourful and enjoyable this time around. I just like what he's giving us here. Let it be known that GoGo Penguin had one of the most stacked lineups in electronic music on an album I think I've seen ever, to be honest. This was a remix album of their 2020 album, which was really good, and the remixes were possibly even better than the album that they came up with themselves. They are a jazz group, but the remixes from Machine Drum, Portico Quartets, Clark, Cornelius, 808 State, just to name a few. Nathan Fake was on this thing as well. Just so many names were all over this album, giving some fantastic remixes and fantastic interpretations of the original songs. This is one of the better remix albums I think I've come across in quite some time. And yeah, GoGo Penguin are pretty underrated as is anyway. But if you want a starting point and want to hear so many cool ideas being thrown together on one album through the different minds and the different lenses of different artists, this is a pretty cool way to begin. Every day I have the blues. The album from Blue, which was literally a dangerous game to play if you wanted to take a shot every time Blue was said on this album or Blue was referenced on this album, because he committed like a madman to the Blue theme across this whole thing. There were hints of it on his last album, which was with Exile, which came out last year. There were a couple of tracks that really went hard into the Blue references, and I thought they weren't that great, but he actually managed to maintain some really creative ideas and creative ways of bringing up the word blue and bringing up the idea of blue on this album the whole way through. And I don't know how this album ended up being as good as it is. It almost doesn't deserve to be as good as this, because it should have got redundant, it should have got boring, it should have got a bit stale, it should have got a bit silly, but it just didn't. And I was impressed. I think this is a very good album from Blue, and a pretty silly concept as well, but he makes it work. And finally, for my honourable mentions in the albums section, like I say, stick around to the end because you will get a song section too, is Magdalena Bay, probably the most hyped up album from an indie artist this year. I've seen this on nearly every list I've come across already, and I can totally see why. I have no qualms with seeing this one get as much hype as it has. I personally think there's more from this band. That was what I said in my review. I think there is more to give from this band, because there were a few tracks, particularly towards the end, that started to lose my interest, but there's so much to love on this album. Chiri, Secrets, brackets Your Fire, You Lose, The Beginning, which is one of the best tracks as well, and that comes right at the end of the album, which does go against what I said about towards the end, but it ends on one of the best tracks. But yeah, there were just a few tracks that just didn't quite captivate me, but I just think there's so much potential. These guys already know how to make great pop music. They have been for years as well, by the way. Their EP from last year, which I covered on this channel, was very good as well. So look, this is their breakout album. They're getting a lot of success through the TikTok era, and I think they could break even bigger than they have. And I still think there's potential for them to drop a better album than this, but for what it is, for a debut album, this is very good. So that's all the albums done. Next, we have the song section. Stick around for this, because I'm just going to run through little snippets of like 10 to 15-ish songs. 3, 2, 1, go.
I want to be your number one. You hold me to the sky.
I'm tired of the road, no I can't see the crowd. I'm so drunk, don't you see?
On the seat in the wars, I booked the reservations on the beach in the port. Let's sing separation of the sheep and the.
I'm stranded in the cold and it's been blowing from you lately. I'm pretending everything is just fine and peachy.
That bitch bad, I need it. She see the bag, you know she sweet it. She see that I get to the cake fast, so she let me beat it. No nigga, I will not eat it.
This bitch got me paying no rent, paying for trips, diamonds on her neck, diamonds on her wrist.
On the knees in my inbox, tryna call AJ honey. I go tape, make it rain on sunny. I came from the dirt, so we keep shit muddy. Arabic dub.